She asked me to come for you, a woman said while I was on the street with nothing. I had lost my wife, and my son and daughter-in-law took everything from me. I didn't understand who she was or why she knew my name. But when she mentioned my wife, I felt a chill. She asked me to follow her, and what happened next changed my destiny. That October afternoon, sitting on a bench in Central Park, with just a small suitcase containing the only possessions I had left, I never imagined my life would take another radical turn. I stared blankly at the phone that no longer rang, not one call from Michael, my only son, after he had coldly notified me that I had to vacate the house where I had lived for 30 years, the house I built with Emily, the house where we raised him. Dad. The lawyers have reviewed the will and the deeds. He had told me just 2 weeks after Emily's funeral. Everything is in the company's name and, as the new CEO, I need that property for corporate purposes. His words echoed in my head as I watched families pass by me, parents with young children, elderly couples walking slowly, arm in arm, entire worlds that continued to turn while mine had stopped abruptly just a month ago, when Emily lost her battle with the illness that consumed her for the last year. I was so lost in these thoughts that I didn't notice when someone stopped in front of me. A woman in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a simple bun, dressed with understated elegance, looked at me with a mixture of compassion and determination. "Mr. Daniel Montero?" she asked in a soft but firm voice. I looked up, surprised to hear my name. "Yes." "She asked me to come for you." Those words, spoken so simply, left me momentarily speechless. There was only one she in my life who could have asked someone to do something like that. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask, studying her face for any familiar feature. "My name is Sarah Johnson. I was Emily's friend since we were girls. You probably don't remember me well. We only met a few times over the years." I searched her face again, and scattered fragments of memories began to surface. A woman laughing with Emily at some celebration. Someone mentioned occasionally in conversation. A peripheral but constant presence. One that, in my obsession with building my company and securing our financial future, had never occupied a central place in my attention. "Emily left me specific instructions," Sarah continued. "She asked me to wait a reasonable time after she was gone, and then to come find you when you needed it most." "How did you know where to find me?" I asked, bewildered. A faint smile crossed her face. "Emily told me that when everything fell apart, I would find you here. This park was always your shared refuge." Something in her voice, in the precision of that intimate knowledge, sent a shiver down my spine. Emily and I, we had indeed always considered that specific corner of Central Park our sacred space. We had met here 40 years ago. I had proposed to her here. We came here when we needed to escape the world, even during her illness, when her strength allowed it. "What do you want?" I asked, suddenly cautious. Recent experience with my own son had taught me to be wary. I never imagined my life would take another radical turn. I stared blankly at the phone that no longer rang, not one call from Michael, my only son, after he had coldly notified me that I had to vacate the house where I had lived for 30 years, the house I built with Emily, the house where we raised him. Dad. The lawyers have reviewed the will and the deeds. He had told me just 2 weeks after Emily's funeral. Everything is in the company's name and, as the new CEO, what else could I lose? "All right," I replied, standing up and grabbing my suitcase. "I'll go with you. My name is Daniel Montero Vasquez. I was born in 1,970 inches, a modest neighborhood in Queens, the son of a university professor and a nurse who taught me the value of constant effort in education. Thanks to their sacrifices, I was able to study international business at NYU, where I met Emily Linares during my sophomore year. Emily was brilliant, determined, and had a worldview that captivated me from the first moment. While I focused on the technical aspects of our major, she always saw beyond, the human connections behind every transaction, the ethical implications of every business decision. We complemented each other perfectly. We married young, just after graduating from college, with a small loan from my father and Emily's savings. We rented a tiny office and founded Montero Imports. The first few years were extraordinarily difficult. We worked 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. We often slept in the office itself to save time on commuting. We ate the bare minimum, reinvesting every dollar earned. Emily handled client relations and administration, while I managed international negotiations and logistics. Slowly, we began to specialize in importing Asian products, just as the American market was beginning to open up to that region. We were pioneers in identifying opportunities that others didn't see. Michael was born in 1992, when the company had already achieved some stability. We decided he would be an only child so we could dedicate the time and attention he deserved, despite our busy professional schedules. Emily masterfully balanced her role as a mother and an entrepreneur, while I dove deeper and deeper into expanding the business. Daniel, you need to be more present. Emily frequently reminded me, we are building this to have a family, not just a company. I tried to listen to her. I really did. But there was always a new opportunity, an important contract, a crucial negotiation that required my full attention. As Michael grew, my presence in his life was increasingly limited to conversations about the company and his future role in it. By the time Michael turned 18, Montero Imports had transformed into the Montero Enterprise Group. With offices in 4 countries and a diversified portfolio that included not only imports but also distribution, logistics consulting, and eventually real estate investments. Our small initial office had become a 12-story corporate building on Park Avenue, and our modest rented apartment was now an impressive residence on the Upper East Side. Michael studied business administration at a prestigious American university. During his summers, we integrated him into different departments of the company so he could learn all the areas. He showed intelligence and charisma, but also a certain impatience that Emily noted with concern. "He doesn't want to learn from the ground up," she commented one night, after Michael had aggressively questioned why he had to spend time in the inventory department. "He thinks he can lead without understanding the fundamentals." "It's just a phase," I replied, dismissing it. I was the same at his age. He'll mature. It was during his senior year of college when Michael met Linda Herrera, the daughter of a hotel businessman who had fallen on hard times. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and apparently shared Michael's interest in business. They got married just a year after meeting, in an extravagant ceremony that cost more than what Emily and I had invested to start our company. "There's something about her that bothers me," Emily confessed as we watched the happy couple during the reception. "The way she looks at our possessions, as if evaluating them." "You're being unfair," I answered. "She's just nervous about joining a new family." How wrong I was. The first changes were subtle. Michael and Linda began pushing for greater responsibilities within the company, despite their limited experience. They suggested aggressive expansions, risky acquisitions, and a more ostentatious presence in social circles where the real deals are made, according to Linda. Emily, always the voice of caution, expressed her reservations during our board meetings. "We have grown organically for 30 years, she argued. "We don't need to take on excessive debt to impress anyone." The tension gradually increased. Michael and Linda began to form a block against us, cultivating alliances with younger members of the management team, organizing meetings they forgot to invite us to, implementing minor changes that seemed harmless individually, but collectively altered the company's fundamental philosophy. By then, Emily had already noticed the first symptoms of the illness that would eventually take her from me: unusual fatigue, aches we attributed to stress, small memory lapses that worried us, but which we pushed aside in the face of daily pressures. When the diagnosis finally came, devastating in its medical clarity, Emily insisted on keeping it private. "I don't want to be treated differently," she explained, "and I need to use the time I have left to make sure everything is in order." Over the next year, as she bravely fought her illness, Emily seemed to distance herself from the company's operational aspects. I assumed it was a natural part of her process, her way of focusing on her health and more personal matters. "I trust you to handle the transition," she told me one afternoon as she rested in our garden. "Just promise me you'll be fair but cautious." "I promise," I replied, not fully understanding which transition she was referring to. When Emily finally left us, grief blinded me to everything else. For weeks, I barely functioned enough to survive each day. I delegated responsibilities, signed documents without reading them carefully, and isolated myself in the house we had shared, surrounded by memories of our life together. It was precisely in this state of vulnerability that Michael and Linda executed their plan. "Dad, there are some legal matters we need to resolve," Michael told me, about 3 weeks after the funeral. Simple paperwork to ensure the company's continuity. I signed powers of attorney, bank authorizations, corporate documents, all presented as standard procedures to protect Mom's legacy. Why would I doubt my own son at a time like that? The reality was brutally revealed 6 weeks later. One morning, when I tried to make a routine transfer, my bank access was denied. Calls to the company went unanswered. And finally, that afternoon, Michael and Linda showed up at the house with a full legal team. "The properties are in the company's name," the lead lawyer explained coldly. "And according to the new shareholder structure, you have been relieved of your executive positions due to temporary emotional incapacity, with a limited compensation that has already been deposited into your personal account." "What are you doing, Michael?" I asked, unable to fully process what was happening. "It's just business, Dad. A generational evolution. We're protecting you from yourself during your grief." The limited compensation turned out to be just enough to survive for a few months in a modest hotel. My credit cards were canceled. My office was emptied of my personal belongings. My presence in the company I had built from scratch was erased with corporate efficiency. I consulted lawyers, of course, but Michael and Linda had been thorough. The property transfers had my signature. The corporate decisions followed technically legal protocols. And my emotional state after losing Emily provided a plausible justification for the temporary measures that had stripped me of everything. "We can fight this in court," a lawyer explained with brutal honesty, "but it will take years, cost a fortune you no longer have, and the outcome is uncertain given the existing documentation." And that's how. 53 days after losing the woman who had been my partner for 33 years, I found myself sitting on a bench in Central Park, with a small suitcase and nowhere to go, when Sarah Johnson appeared before me with a message from Emily. Sarah's apartment was located in the West Village, in a meticulously preserved 1,940 building. It was a spacious but not ostentatious space, decorated with obvious taste but no excess. Books everywhere, abundant plants, and framed photographs capturing moments of a life well lived. "Please sit," she offered, as she prepared coffee in an open kitchen that allowed for conversation. "You must be exhausted." I sank into a comfortable armchair, suddenly aware of how tired I was. Not just physically, but on a deeper level. The kind of exhaustion that comes from watching everything you've built crumble. "How did you know exactly what happened?" I asked, watching her move with quiet efficiency. "Emily kept me informed about everything," she replied, placing 2 cups of coffee on the center table before sitting across from me. "And afterward, I've been following the situation discreetly." "Following the situation?" Sarah took a sip of her coffee before answering. "Emily knew, or at least strongly suspected, what Michael and Linda were planning. She had no concrete proof, just a mother's intuition and observations accumulated over the years." "And why didn't she tell me anything?" The question came out more accusatory than I intended. "She did tell you, Daniel, in her own way. Those conversations about being cautious, her worries about Michael's impulsiveness, her comments about Linda. But you were focused on the company, and then on her illness." Her words hit me with the force of a long-ignored truth. Emily had tried to warn me, in her subtle but clear way, and I, blinded by my trust in family ties and overwhelmed by the pain of her illness, hadn't paid enough attention. "Emily wasn't just intuitive. She was also practical," Sarah continued, reaching for a manila envelope resting on a nearby shelf. "And that's why she prepared this." She handed me the envelope with a formality that suggested the importance of its contents. Opening it, I found bank documents, account statements, and a legal contract that took me a few moments to fully understand. It's a trust, I explained, more to myself than to her, as I reviewed the pages. Created 4 years ago? 5, Sarah corrected gently. When Emily started to notice worrying changes in Michael's attitude after he married Linda, the trust was in Sarah's name as the administrator, but the beneficiaries were Emily and me. It contained a sum that left me momentarily breathless, $10 million, carefully transferred over the years from Emily's personal accounts. I don't understand. Where did this money come from? I asked, stunned. Emily always maintained her own investments. Her family inheritance, bonuses she reinvested instead of spent, side projects she developed discreetly. You were so busy with the main expansion that you probably didn't notice these details. She was right. In our division of responsibilities, I had focused on the global strategy, while Emily handled financial aspects I considered routine. Apparently, within that routine, she had been silently building a contingency plan. Why didn't she put it in a normal joint account? Why a trust administered by you? Because she knew your son, Sarah replied with direct but compassionate frankness. And she knew that if anything happened to her, Michael would find a way to control any asset that was directly within your reach. The painful accuracy of Emily's foresight overwhelmed me. She had anticipated exactly what would happen, down to the last detail. My own son, whom we had raised with everything we could give him, had not hesitated to strip me of everything as soon as he had the chance. The trust has specific conditions, Sarah continued, pointing to a particular section of the document. It cannot be transferred to Michael or any corporate entity related to him. It is protected from legal claims related to the Montero Enterprise Group, and it requires my approval for any withdrawal greater than 5% of the capital in a single year. Emily thought of everything, I murmured, still processing the magnitude of what I held in my hands. She did it for you, Sarah said simply, because she knew you better than anyone, and she knew you would give everything away if your son asked, even after a betrayal. The words were painfully true. Despite everything that had happened, a part of me was still looking for explanations, justifications, for Michael's actions. A father's love doesn't fade easily, even in the face of the most blatant evidence of betrayal. There's more, Sarah added, pointing to a smaller envelope inside the main package that I had initially overlooked. I opened it with suddenly trembling fingers. Inside, I found a handwritten letter in Emily's unmistakable script. It was dated just 2 weeks before she passed. My dearest Daniel, if you are reading this, it means my suspicions were confirmed, and Michael has acted as I feared. It also means you have found Sarah, which makes me very happy. I am not proud of having kept secrets, but I needed to protect you from what I saw developing. For years, I watched our son change under Linda's influence, how his ambition transformed into something darker than a simple desire for success. The money in this trust is yours, to rebuild whatever you need. Sarah will help you. Trust her, as I have trusted her for 40 years of friendship. She is wiser and stronger than you imagine. Forgive Michael, eventually, if you can, but do not allow him to hurt you anymore. And remember that building a new life is never impossible, regardless of age or circumstances. I loved you every day of our life together, even those when you were too busy to fully notice, and I will continue to love you, wherever I am now. Emily! Tears were streaming freely down my face by the time I finished reading. It was her voice, as clear as if she were sitting next to me, offering the same loving but firm advice that had guided our marriage for over 3 decades. You will need time, Sarah said softly, offering me a tissue to process all of this. I have nowhere to stay, I replied, suddenly aware of my immediate situation. The hotel where I had been staying required payment in advance, and my resources were running out quickly. Emily thought of that too, she replied with a small smile. My apartment has a guest room that I almost never use. It is available to you for as long as you need to reorganize. I looked at her with new curiosity. This woman, practically a stranger despite her long friendship with Emily, was offering me not only financial resources, but also shelter when I needed it most. Why would you do this for me? I asked, genuinely baffled by such generosity. For Emily. Initially, she admitted with refreshing honesty, my apartment has a guest room that I almost never use. It is available to you for as long as you need to reorganize. I looked at her with new curiosity. This woman, practically a stranger despite her long friendship with Emily, was offering me not only financial resources, but also shelter when I needed it most. Why would you do this for me? I asked, genuinely baffled by such generosity. For Emily. Initially, she admitted with refreshing honesty, tomorrow we can start planning your next steps. That night, in the guest room of Sarah's apartment, I slept deeply for the first time since Emily's passing, not because the pain was gone, or because Michael's betrayal hurt any less, but because in the midst of the chaos, I had found an unexpected foothold. And as I drifted off to sleep, I could almost hear Emily whispering, I told you you'd be in good hands. The following weeks were a blur of constant reorganization. With access to the trust activated, I could begin to rebuild my life from entirely new foundations. The first step was to consult with a legal team specializing in corporate and family disputes, unlike my previous desperate attempts. I could now afford top-tier lawyers who meticulously reviewed every document I had signed during my period of vulnerability. There are significant procedural irregularities, my lead lawyer, Rachel Smith, explained as we reviewed files in Sarah's dining room, who discreetly let us work. Not enough to completely reverse what happened, but enough to negotiate from a position of strength. I don't want the company back, I replied, surprising even myself with the firmness of this decision. I want a clean break and protection from any future claims. This clarity of purpose, so different from my initial confusion, had developed gradually during my conversations with Sarah. Every morning we shared coffee on her small balcony, discussing possibilities and reflecting on lessons learned. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what is truly essential, Sarah commented one of those mornings as we watched the sunrise over the city. I lived it when Robert, my husband, passed away 15 years ago. Gradually, Sarah shared her own story. Widowed at 41, she had transformed a small inheritance into a modest but stable investment portfolio, mainly in residential real estate. She never had children, but she maintained a network of deep friendships, with Emily always at the center of that circle. Emily admired your business vision, she told me during one of our talks, but she feared you were so focused on building an empire that you forgot why you were doing it in the first place. Her words resonated deeply as I developed my legal and financial strategy. Did I really want to spend the next few years embroiled in legal battles for corporate control? Or was it time to completely redefine what success meant at this stage of my life? The negotiation with Michael and Linda was conducted entirely through legal representatives. My son, apparently surprised by my sudden position of financial strength, initially tried to maintain his aggressive stance. My client considers that any undisclosed assets during the corporate restructuring process constitute fraudulent concealment, his lawyer argued during the first formal meeting. My client considers that manipulating a grieving man into signing property transfers constitutes abuse of trust and potentially fraud, Rachel replied with glacial precision. We can discuss these contrasting viewpoints publicly in court if you prefer. The threat of public litigation, explained as we reviewed files in Sarah's dining room, who discreetly let us work. Not enough to completely reverse what happened, but enough to negotiate from a position of strength. I don't want the company back, I replied, surprising even myself with the firmness of this decision. I want a clean break and protection from any future claims. This clarity of purpose, so different from my initial confusion, had developed gradually during my conversations with Sarah. But it's also a clean resolution that allows you to look forward instead of being trapped in the past. She was right. As I signed the final documents, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was no longer the betrayed founder of the Montero Enterprise Group. I was simply Daniel Montero, a 53-year-old man, with significant resources and the freedom to completely redefine his path. During this period, my relationship with Sarah evolved subtly but constantly. What began as a pragmatic lodging arrangement gradually transformed into genuine companionship. We cooked together, shared books and movies, and had conversations that stretched late into the night. Emily always said you were a different man. Away from the pressure of the office, Sarah commented one night, as we shared a bottle of wine after a jointly prepared dinner. More reflective, more present. She always saw the best in me, I replied, feeling the familiar pang of loss, though now tinged with gratitude for the years we shared. And she also saw your blind spots, Sarah added, with the direct frankness I had come to appreciate, like your tendency to trust people too much who didn't deserve it, simply because they shared your last name. Her comment touched a painful truth I had been avoiding, the magnitude of my own role in what happened with Michael. I had raised him prioritizing material success over emotional connection. I had shown him that the company always came first, and then I was surprised when he applied those exact lessons against me. Do you think there's still a chance for reconciliation? I asked, more vulnerable than I had been with anyone since Emily's passing. Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. I don't know, but I believe any future relationship would have to be built on entirely new foundations, not on expectations of the past. As the legal negotiation concluded, and my financial situation stabilized, I began to consider my next steps. The trust Emily created provided security, but after a lifetime of business activity, the idea of simple retirement was unsatisfying. What were you really passionate about in the early days of your career? Sarah asked one morning, as I browsed some available properties on my tablet. I had decided to buy my own apartment, although the idea of leaving Sarah's company was strangely daunting. The connections, I replied after a moment's reflection, finding unique products in one corner of the world that solved problems in another. It was like building invisible bridges between needs and solutions. And what happened to that passion? It turned into operations, expansion, growth metrics. I stopped, recognizing the pattern. I lost touch with what really motivated me initially. That casual conversation planted a seed that would germinate in the following weeks. As I evaluated options for reinvesting part of the trust, I began to explore specialized niches that large conglomerates, like the one I had built, typically ignored. And it was during this exploration that I received the news that would dramatically change the landscape. The Montero Enterprise Group was facing serious financial difficulties. Apparently, Michael and Linda have been living an expansive lifestyle, Rachel explained during a phone call. Multiple properties, yachts, private jets, and simultaneously making increasingly risky business decisions. The company we had meticulously built over decades was now on the verge of bankruptcy, a victim of unchecked ambition and reckless management. I should have felt some vindictive satisfaction, I suppose, but what predominated was a deep sadness for the wasted legacy. What will happen to the employees? I asked her, thinking of the hundreds of families who depended on the company. Most will likely lose their jobs if Michael doesn't find rescue investors urgently, Rachel replied. And considering the magnitude of the crisis and his current reputation in financial circles, that seems unlikely. That night, as I shared the news with Sarah over dinner, I found myself considering possibilities I would have completely dismissed weeks ago. I could intervene, I said, almost thinking aloud, not to regain control, but to stabilize the situation enough to protect the employees. Sarah watched me attentively before responding. Are you willing to help after everything they did to you? I wouldn't be doing it for Michael or Linda, I clarified. I'd be doing it for the people who built that company with me, for the families who depend on those jobs. Expression softened. That is exactly the answer Emily would have expected from you. The mention of Emily solidified my resolve. I would not regain control of the Montero Enterprise Group, nor would I reinvest in the existing structure. But perhaps I could create something new from the ashes, something that honored the original spirit with which we had begun decades ago. Fate, however, had its own plans for this situation, and the next chapter would begin with an unexpected call from the person I least imagined would contact me voluntarily. My son, Michael. Michael's call came on a Tuesday morning while I was having breakfast with Sarah on the small balcony that had become our daily ritual, seeing his name on the screen. I felt a contradictory mix of hope and apprehension. "Should I answer?" I asked Sarah, who watched me with a cautious expression. "It's your decision," she replied. "But remember to maintain clear boundaries, no matter what he says." I took a deep breath and accepted the call, activating the speakerphone so Sarah could hear. "Dad!" Michael's voice sounded strained, stripped of the arrogance that had characterized our last interactions. "I need to talk to you, in person." "About what, exactly?" I asked, maintaining a neutral tone I had perfected over decades of complicated negotiations. "The company is facing certain temporary challenges. I think we could benefit from your experience." The understatement was almost comical. According to my contacts, the Montero Enterprise Group was in a virtual freefall, with creditors demanding payment and key suppliers halting operations due to unpaid bills. "Where do you want to meet?" I finally asked. "The Street Regis Hotel restaurant? Tomorrow at 11? "I'll see you there," I replied, ending the call without further elaboration. Sarah looked at me with a mix of concern and admiration. "Are you sure about this?" "No," I admitted honestly. "But I need to see his face when he explains why he thinks I should help him after what he did." The Street Regis, with its discreet elegance and exclusive clientele, had for years been the Montero Enterprise Group's preferred location for closing important negotiations. Michael's choice of venue was revealing. He was trying to recreate the past dynamic, when I was the mentor and he was the apprentice. I deliberately arrived 10 minutes late, a small but significant reversal of our traditional roles. Michael was already seated at a secluded table, nervously checking his watch. I immediately noticed the signs of stress, pronounced dark circles, tense posture, and the absence of the impeccable suit that normally characterized his carefully cultivated image. "Dad," he stood up hastily when he saw me, extending his hand in a formal gesture that contrasted painfully with the spontaneous hugs of years past. I shook his hand briefly before sitting down. "Michael." An uncomfortable silence settled as the waiter took our order. I ordered only a coffee, subtly indicating I didn't plan to extend this meeting. "You look good," Michael finally commented, clearly puzzled by my appearance. He had expected to find the defeated man from months ago, not someone radiating renewed posture. "I'm fine," I replied simply. "What exactly did you want to talk about?" Michael took a long sip of water, as if gathering courage. "The situation is complicated. Some international expansion projects have faced unexpected setbacks. Temporary, of course. Setbacks like spending $60 million on personal properties while the company accumulates unsustainable debt?" I asked with devastating calm. His surprise at my detailed knowledge of the situation was momentarily visible before he regained his composure. "I see you still have good contacts." "I always valued authentic relationships over transactional ones," I replied. "Something you apparently forgot." Michael partially dropped his facade. "We need a bridge loan, 3 months, to restructure operations and secure new investors. If the company collapses now, everything will be lost." "Everything like what, exactly? Your lifestyle? The properties in Aspen and the Hamptons? The jet you bought while laying off employees with 20 years of service?" My calm tone seemed to destabilize him more than any emotional outburst. "I made mistakes," he admitted, though the admission sounded calculated. "I let Linda influence strategic decisions too much." "Ah," the predictable move of finding someone else to blame. First, my emotional incapacity. Now his wife's influence. "Where is Linda, by the way?" Michael looked away. "She's taking some time to reflect. The recent pressures have been complicated for our marriage." Translation: she had begun to abandon the ship she herself had helped sink. "How much do you need, exactly?" I asked, wanting to hear the figure directly. $8 million. "Would secure operations during the critical restructuring period," he replied, visibly relieved to finally be discussing specifics. "With your expertise, supervising the process, we could regain operational stability in 90 days. I considered his proposal while slowly drinking my coffee. From a purely financial perspective, it was possible. Emily's trust contained sufficient resources, and my contacts confirmed that the core business was still fundamentally sound, despite the recent management. And what would I get? Exactly? I finally asked. Full restoration as chairman emeritus, with a minority but significant equity stake. Shared control over major strategic decisions. And your role would be? CEO, reporting to a restructured board, which would include your substantial representation. The proposal was meticulously calibrated to appeal to my potentially wounded ego. Enough authority to satisfy desires for vindication, insufficient to truly threaten his ultimate control. Interesting, I commented neutrally. Do you have a formal proposal documented? Michael immediately pulled a folder from his briefcase, revealing how prepared he had come for this negotiation. Here are the preliminary terms, subject to a joint legal review. I briefly scanned the documents, noting both the explicit terms and the strategic omissions. It was an agreement designed to appear superficially fair, while containing multiple mechanisms to gradually undermine any real authority I might exercise. I'll review it with my advisors, I said finally, putting the folder away. I will contact you within 3 days with my decision. We need to act quickly, Michael pressed, revealing the anxiety behind his professional facade. There are critical financial commitments next week. 3 days, I repeated firmly. That's a reasonable time, considering the magnitude of the investment requested. As we parted with uncomfortable formality, Michael made one last attempt at an emotional connection. Mom always believed in second chances. You know, in the possibility of redemption. The mention of Emily, by the son who had systematically betrayed everything she valued, generated a wave of indignation that I carefully controlled. Yes, I replied as I stood up. But she also believed that redemption requires true repentance, not opportunistic convenience. That same afternoon, I assembled a small team of advisors in Sarah's apartment to evaluate Michael's proposal. Rachel Smith, representing the legal aspects. Mark Miller, an experienced financial consultant. And Sarah, whose clear and independent perspective had proven invaluable. From a purely financial perspective, it's risky but potentially viable, Mark explained after reviewing the numbers. The core business maintains loyal customers and strategic suppliers. The current crisis is primarily a result of reckless expansion and excessive personal spending. Legally, the proposal contains multiple problematic clauses, Rachel added, pointing to specific sections of the document. Particularly these provisions on dispute resolution and voting mechanisms, which would effectively neutralize any real authority, while you maintain financial liability. Sarah had remained silent during the technical analysis, but now she spoke directly. The real question is, do you really want to reintegrate into an environment where betrayal has already happened once? Where you would have to interact daily with people who demonstrated such a willingness to manipulate you? Her question went directly to the heart of the dilemma. Beyond the financial and legal aspects, could I truly rebuild a functional working relationship with Michael after everything that had happened? And what about the employees? I asked, vocalizing the concern that had been present since I learned of the crisis. Many have spent decades building that company. They don't deserve to lose their jobs because of Michael's recklessness. Is there another alternative? There might be, Mark suggested thoughtfully, one that would protect jobs without reintegrating you into the existing structure. And so, an alternative strategy began to take shape, one that would fundamentally transform my relationship with the company I had founded, and with the son who had betrayed me. The alternative strategy that Mark outlined that afternoon was bold, yet elegant in its simplicity. Instead of rescuing the Montero Enterprise Group under its current structure, we could facilitate a partial acquisition and controlled restructuring that would preserve fundamental operations while eliminating non-viable components. Essentially, we would let the sick parts of the business follow their natural course toward bankruptcy, Mark explained, pointing to specific divisions in the financial documents, while we selectively rescue the main operations and, most importantly, the associated jobs. The plan would require creating a new corporate entity, that would acquire strategic assets from the original group during a supervised restructuring process. This would allow essential operations to continue, without the burden of excessive debts and reckless decisions accumulated by Michael and Linda. Legally, it's complex but viable, Rachel confirmed. After considering the legal aspects, it would require precise timing and delicate negotiations with key creditors, but it would maintain legal protection for you, while ensuring operational continuity for valuable employees. As I considered this alternative, I understood that it represented not just a practical solution. The real question is, do you really want to reintegrate into an environment where betrayal has already happened once? Where you would have to interact daily with people who demonstrated such a willingness to manipulate you? Her question went directly to the heart of the dilemma. Beyond the financial and legal aspects, could I truly rebuild a functional working relationship with Michael after everything that had happened? And what about the employees? I asked. Michael made one last attempt at an emotional connection. Mom always believed in second chances. You know, in the possibility of redemption. The mention of Emily, by the son who had systematically betrayed everything she valued, generated a wave of indignation that I carefully controlled. Yes, I replied as I stood up. But she also believed that redemption requires true repentance, not opportunistic convenience. That same afternoon, the real question is, do you really want to reintegrate into an environment where betrayal has already happened once? Where you would have to interact daily with people who demonstrated such a willingness to manipulate you? Her question went directly to the heart of the dilemma. Beyond the financial and legal aspects, could I truly rebuild a functional working relationship with Michael after everything that had happened? And what about the employees? I asked, but also a philosophical answer to the dilemma I faced. Neither complete abandonment nor vulnerable reintegration, but a constructive transformation that honored what was valuable, while allowing natural consequences for reckless actions. I need to think about this carefully, I said finally. The personal implications are significant. After the advisors left, Sarah and I shared a quiet dinner in the kitchen. The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of the pending decisions, and I need the key department heads to be present. The directors? But this is a private strategic discussion. My proposal directly affects fundamental operations, I replied with quiet firmness. The people responsible for implementing it deserve to be involved from the beginning. After a significant pause, Michael agreed, though clearly unsettled by my unexpected approach. Arriving at the Montero Enterprise Group headquarters that afternoon was a surreal experience. The building, which had been practically my second home for decades, now seemed simultaneously familiar and foreign. The staff at the reception desk recognized me immediately, their expressions revealing surprise and a certain hope. "Mr. Daniel!" exclaimed Rose, the main receptionist, who had been with us for over 15 years. "What a joy to see you again." "Thank you, Rose. It's good to see you too." While waiting for the elevator, I noticed subtle but telling signs of decay. Deferred maintenance in common areas, evident staff reductions in support positions, and a general atmosphere of tension that contrasted sharply with the vibrant energy that had characterized the company during my management. The main boardroom, where Michael had scheduled our meeting, was occupied by about 12 people when I arrived. The requested department heads, clearly nervous about this unexpected summons, Michael, projecting forced confidence, and surprisingly, Linda, who had apparently concluded her period of reflection long enough to attend this critical discussion. "Thank you all for joining us," Michael began as I took a seat. "As you know, we are exploring strategic options to strengthen our position in the current market. And, if you'll allow me," I interrupted gently, but with a natural authority that silenced the room immediately, "I would like to present my proposal directly as it affects everyone present." Michael nodded tensely. That reflected the essential values that had been obscured during years of unrestrained expansion. The next morning, I called Michael. "I've considered your proposal," I said without preamble when he answered. "I have a counter-proposal I'd like to discuss, in person. Can we meet at the headquarters this afternoon?" His surprise at my request to meet at the corporate headquarters, territory he now controlled, was palpable. "Of course. 3 o'clock? Perfect." Linda leaned in to whisper something urgently to Michael, who silenced her with a gesture while maintaining a carefully neutral expression. However, I continued, the core of the business remains fundamentally sound. The relationships with strategic clients, the accumulated expertise of the team, and the reputation for quality built over decades retain significant value. I displayed a presentation that Mark had prepared, clearly illustrating the disconnect between fundamental operational strengths and the compromised financial structure. My proposal is as follows: the creation of New Montero Logistics, an independent entity that will selectively acquire key operational assets, strategic business relationships, and, most importantly, retain essential personnel. The presentation went on to detail specifics, the proposed structure, financial mechanisms, and, crucially, ceding the floor with obvious reluctance. The Montero Enterprise Group is technically insolvent, I began, without unnecessary preambles, watching as several directors exchanged alarmed glances. Financial obligations significantly exceed current operational capacity, and key creditors are preparing imminent actions. The direct frankness contrasted dramatically with recent corporate communications, which had consistently downplayed the severity of the situation. Professional tone that avoided direct accusations but clearly established implicit responsibilities. The silence that followed was profound. The department heads were processing the personal and professional implications, while Michael and Linda exchanged looks of barely concealed dismay. "This is irregular," Linda finally interjected, recovering her composure. "You are essentially proposing to dismantle the current company for the exclusive benefit of a new entity under your control." "I am proposing to rescue the viable elements from a structure doomed by reckless management," I corrected calmly, "preserving jobs, business relationships, and components of the legacy that Emily and I built over 30 years. The mention of Emily generated a visible reaction among the veteran executives. Their respect for the deceased co-founder remained intact, and the implicit invocation of her original vision for the company resonated powerfully. "And what role, exactly, do you envision for the current administration in this new entity?" Michael asked, regaining enough composure to address the critical question everyone anticipated. "None. At the executive level," I replied with direct frankness, but without animosity. "Trust, once fundamentally broken, cannot be simply rebuilt through legal agreements." However, I paused deliberately, watching as Michael seemed to physically shrink at the prospect of complete exclusion. Explicit guarantees for transferred employees, including job continuity, recognition of seniority, and a limited but significant ownership stake in the new entity. This plan allows us to preserve critical jobs and valuable business relationships, while allowing non-viable components to follow the natural course. Determined by previous administrative decisions, I concluded, maintaining a neutral, wounded pride versus disparate pragmatism. "This requires careful consideration," Richard Moore, the veteran CFO with a reputation for unquestionable integrity, finally intervened. "Can we review the full documentation before continuing this discussion?" "Of course," I agreed, distributing prepared folders with detailed analysis. "I suggest a 30-minute recess for a preliminary review, followed by a question-and-answer session." During the recess, I observed revealing dynamics playing out in small groups. Department heads consulting urgently among themselves, clearly evaluating the personal implications. Michael and Linda, in a heated private discussion in a far corner, and significantly, several veteran executives discreetly approaching me to express cautious support for my proposal. "The last few months have been challenging," commented Mary Ann Simmons, the HR director with 25 years at the company. "We've lost valuable staff, and the uncertainty is affecting fundamental operations." When the meeting resumed, it was evident that the general consensus among the department heads favored seriously exploring my proposal. Michael, recognizing the emerging political reality, adopted a pragmatic, though visibly reluctant, approach. "Conceptually, there are merits to a strategic restructuring," he conceded with tense formality. "However, Specific details regarding the valuation of transferred assets and compensation for current shareholders require substantial negotiation. Translation: he was looking to maximize his personal extraction of value before the structure completely collapsed. Of course, I replied. I propose establishing a transitional committee with independent representation to oversee a transparent and equitable valuation process. I recognize that you are still my son, and Emily valued family ties deeply. Therefore, I am willing to offer a secondary administrative position, strictly operational, with direct supervision, and no unilateral decision-making authority over financial or personnel resources. The offer, clearly inferior to Michael's expectations, but significantly more generous than the complete exclusion I could legally implement, created a visible dilemma in his expression. As the other participants filed out, we remained alone in the boardroom where so many critical decisions had been made over the decades. "Do you really need to exclude me completely from executive leadership?" he asked, partially dropping his professional facade to reveal a genuine vulnerability he hadn't shown in years. "I am your son, and precisely because of that, I am offering you any position at all," I replied with direct, but not cruel, honesty. "You violated a fundamental trust, Michael, not just corporate, but family. Rebuilding a personal relationship will be a gradual process, separate from any corporate arrangements." "And if I reject this proposal completely?" he asked, tension evident in his voice. "Then I will implement the less favorable alternative, a competitive acquisition, facilitated by external investors, with no guarantees for the current administration, and no special family considerations." The recognition of the complete situational reality finally crystallized in his expression. The company he had tried to control unilaterally was effectively lost, regardless of his resistance. My proposal represented the only opportunity to preserve some connection and remaining professional dignity. "I will consult with my advisors," he finally replied. "Of course. I will await your response within 48 hours. As I walked toward the exit, Michael unexpectedly added, "The next 2 hours involved an intensive technical discussion about the specific aspects of potential implementation. Gradually, a preliminary framework for a structured transition emerged. New Montero Logistics would acquire viable operations and key personnel, while the original structure would retain responsibility for problematic financial obligations and non-essential properties." When we finally concluded, Michael requested a private conversation. "How did you manage to recover so completely? After everything?" The question seemed to contain genuine curiosity, along with a fundamental misunderstanding of the real source of personal strength. "Emily," I replied simply. "Even in her absence, her foresight and wisdom created the foundation for rebuilding, and I found authentic support where I least expected it." The next 48 hours were a period of intense but controlled activity, while I awaited Michael's formal response. "But his pragmatism says yes," I replied, considering Michael's options. "And Linda is probably pushing for any resolution that preserves something of their current lifestyle." It's strange, Sarah reflected, how extreme situations reveal fundamental truths about people we thought we knew completely. Her observation resonated deeply with my recent experience. I had thought I knew my son for 31 years, only to discover a capacity for calculated betrayal I never would have imagined. Simultaneously, I had found extraordinary loyalty and wisdom in a woman I barely remembered from peripheral encounters. "Sometimes I wonder if Emily anticipated all of this," I commented, as I poured more wine into our glasses. "Not just Michael's reflection, but everything else, too." The look Sarah gave me contained an emotional complexity I couldn't fully interpret. "Emily always saw patterns where others saw coincidences," she replied finally, "and possibilities where others saw endings." Before I could explore the implicit meanings in her answer, my phone vibrated with an email notification from Rachel Smith. "Michael has responded. Conditional acceptance," I summarized after reviewing the attached document. "He's requesting specific modifications to subsidiary terms, but he accepts the fundamental structure proposed." Sarah smiled slightly. "Congratulations. You found a way to preserve what is valuable, while allowing for appropriate consequences. Her recognition, free of excessive flattery, but genuinely appreciative, meant more than any corporate validation I had received in previous decades. I wouldn't have managed it without your support, I replied with an honesty that surprised even myself. You provided a foundation when everything seemed to be falling apart. Something subtly changed in the atmosphere between us with this admission, an implicit acknowledgement of a connection that had been gradually developing over shared months, moving from initial gratitude towards something deeper and more complex. I should respond to Rachel, I said, after a prolonged moment of eye contact that neither of us seemed willing to break first. Of course, Sarah replied softly. Tomorrow will be a significant day. The following months were a period of accelerated transformation, both professionally and personally. The implementation of the restructuring plan proceeded with surprising efficiency, given the complexity involved. New Montero Logistics officially emerged as an independent corporate entity 3 weeks after the initial agreement, selectively acquiring viable operational assets from the original group. As anticipated, the previous structure eventually entered a formal process of controlled bankruptcy, although the essential components. But his pragmatism says yes, I replied, considering Michael's options. And Linda is probably pushing for any resolution that preserves something of their current lifestyle. It's strange, Sarah reflected, how extreme situations reveal fundamental truths about people we thought we knew completely. Her observation resonated deeply with my recent experience. I had thought I knew my son for 31 years, only to discover a capacity for calculated betrayal I never would have imagined, which prevented a recurrence of his previous financial impulsiveness. Linda, predictably, did not stay with Michael once it became clear that the luxurious lifestyle she had enjoyed would not continue under the new configuration. Their separation, announced discreetly through a generic statement about irreconcilable differences, surprised few within the business circle that had observed her opportunistic behavior for years. My own role in New Montero Logistics was deliberately transitional from the beginning. As the founding chairman, I oversaw the initial implementation of this strategic vision and fundamental operational structures, but with the explicit intention of gradually transferring day-to-day executive responsibilities to a carefully selected professional team. I don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past, I explained during the inaugural meeting of the restructured board of directors. This company must transcend any individual figure, functioning as a sustainable institution based on shared principles and distributed leadership. This philosophy, manifested in corporate structures specifically designed to balance operational efficiency and ethical responsibility, represented a significant evolution from the previous model, which had progressively concentrated authority in individual executive figures. Simultaneously with this professional transformation, I was experiencing an equally profound evolution in my personal life. My relationship with Sarah had continued to develop naturally, transitioning from initial hospitality to genuine companionship, and eventually to a connection that we both recognized as potentially romantic, although initially unverbalized. I should start looking for my own apartment, I mentioned one evening, about 5 months after the initial implementation of the corporate plan. We had developed a comfortable routine of shared dinners, followed by conversations that frequently continued late into the night. Sarah maintained a neutral expression as she replied, "Of course, if that's what you prefer." "I'm not sure." "Prefer is the exact word," I admitted, finding it difficult to articulate the complex emotions I had been experiencing. It just seems appropriate, considering the circumstances. "What circumstances, specifically?" she asked, with the direct clarity I always appreciated, even when it was momentarily uncomfortable. "I've been in your personal space for months. My financial situation is completely stabilized, and, she pressed gently, when I left the sentence incomplete, and our relationship has evolved into something I didn't initially anticipate, something that deserves careful consideration and appropriate space to develop authentically, whatever its eventual direction may be." Her expression softened visibly. "Always so structured. Daniel, approaching even emotional possibilities with strategic planning. Deeply ingrained professional habits, I acknowledged with a self-critical smile, although I'm trying to evolve in that aspect, too. Sarah considered carefully before responding. Have you considered that perhaps this current arrangement isn't just a temporary circumstance, but potentially the foundation for something more permanent? That sharing daily space might be a valuable aspect of the connection we've developed, not just a transient practical necessity? Her alternative perspective surprised me, not because it was completely unexpected, but because she directly expressed a possibility I had been considering privately, without daring to verbalize. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, she interrupted gently, that decisions about future residence could be part of a broader conversation about the relationship we both acknowledge has been evolving over these months. A conversation that deserves complete frankness about our respective hopes and concerns. That night, we began a dialogue that would continue to unfold over the following weeks, an honest but cautious exploration of emerging feelings, a respectful consideration of the complexities involved, and, eventually, an explicit acknowledgement of a deep connection that had blossomed unexpectedly between two people who had experienced significant losses and subsequent reconstructions. Emily would be pleased, I think, I commented one afternoon as we walked through Central Park. That space that held so many layers of personal meaning for both of us. She always valued your friendship deeply. Emily wanted your happiness, regardless of the specific form it might take, Sarah replied. But she would also want any new relationship to be authentic in its own right, not defined primarily by past connections. Her wisdom, as always, illuminated nuances I had been processing internally, the delicate balance between honoring Emily's memory, while simultaneously allowing the organic development of a new connection with its own integrity. A year after that fateful afternoon, when Sarah appeared unexpectedly in Central Park, with a message that would change the course of my existence, we organized a small dinner to commemorate the significant anniversary. The guests included key individuals who had participated in the extraordinary transformation experienced during that period, Rachel Smith and Mark Miller, whose professional advice had been invaluable, Marianne Simmons and Richard Moore, veteran executives who had facilitated the corporate transition with exemplary integrity, and surprisingly, Michael, who had shown a genuine, albeit imperfect, capacity for personal growth during the recent months. To new beginnings, I proposed as the initial toast, when we were all seated on the terrace of the apartment, that Sarah and I now officially shared. Having decided some months prior to formalize the arrangement that had evolved so naturally, and to extraordinary foresight, Sarah added significantly, exchanging a look that contained a shared acknowledgement of the fundamental role Emily had played in the subsequent events, even from her physical absence. The dinner unfolded with a genuine warmth that would have seemed impossible just 12 months earlier. Michael, notably, maintained an appropriately moderate demeanor, participating with an occasional authenticity that suggested the potential for gradual relational rehabilitation, though never a complete restoration of previous trust. I've been reflecting a lot on recent choices, he commented during a later conversation as small groups interacted around the room. We had gradually found the capacity for limited but meaningful dialogues during our structured professional collaboration, particularly on the difference between building and possessing. An important distinction, I replied, recognizing the deep personal relevance of the observation. Mom tried to teach it to me, he continued, with unusual self-awareness. The importance of creating genuine value versus simply controlling resources. I'm sorry I didn't listen properly. Significant learning rarely happens without direct experience, I replied, finding a capacity for a compassionate perspective that would have seemed unattainable. During the initial phases of the betrayal I experienced, the important thing is the future application of present understanding. Our conversation was interrupted by Sarah, calling for attention. as she had prepared a commemorative photo presentation of the significant stages of the past year. As the projected images showed key moments, from corporate reconstruction to personal renewal, I experienced a crystalline clarity about the fundamental nature of the transformation I had undergone. What I had initially perceived as a catastrophic loss, Emily, the company, material security, family trust, had eventually catalyzed a rediscovery of essential values that had been partially obscured during decades of incessant business expansion. The painful betrayal had, paradoxically, created an opportunity for reconnection with fundamental aspects that Emily had always tried to preserve in our shared life. Most significantly, it had facilitated the unexpected development of a relationship with Sarah that contained a depth and authenticity I never would have anticipated as possible at 53 years old. Not a replacement for the extraordinary connection shared with Emily for 33 years, but a completely new chapter, with its own validity, that honored the past, while embracing future possibilities. 2 weeks after that commemorative dinner, Sarah and I visited a special place in the cemetery, where Emily physically rested. I had established a monthly routine of visits, initially solitary, but eventually shared with Sarah. As our relationship evolved toward explicit recognition of its emerging romantic dimension, "We have significant news to share," I commented, as we placed fresh flowers by the elegantly simple headstone. "Although I suspect you probably already anticipated future developments." Even then, the formal announcement had occurred the night before. Our engagement, planned as an intimate ceremony that would bring together the respective circles, developed over decades of separate experiences, but now complementarily intertwined. "Emily always saw potential connections that others missed," Sarah commented with a nostalgic smile, as she carefully arranged the floral arrangement, including possibilities that we hadn't even begun to imagine ourselves. As we stood silently, contemplating the meaning of the transitions experienced, I remembered a crucial conversation with Sarah some months earlier, when we had finally, directly addressed the emotional complexities of developing a new relationship, while simultaneously honoring significant previous connections. "We are not erasing the past or replacing memories," Sarah had explained with compassionate clarity. "We are building a new chapter that incorporates accumulated wisdom, while remaining authentic to present circumstances." Her perspective had provided the conceptual framework for integrating seemingly contradictory experiences, maintaining enduring love for Emily, while simultaneously developing a genuine connection with Sarah, honoring the business legacy built over decades, while implementing necessary fundamental transformation, preserving the potential for limited family reconciliation, while establishing appropriate boundaries based on demonstrated realities. "She asked me to come for you," Sarah had said that fateful day in Central Park, initiating an extraordinary sequence of events that would completely transform the existence I had considered irrevocably destroyed. Reflecting now on the full meaning of that intervention, I understood the true depth of the foresight Emily had demonstrated, not just pragmatic financial protection, through a discreet trust, but a fundamental understanding of the potential for a complementary connection between two people who, superficially, seemed significantly different, but shared essential values and a capacity for genuine growth, even after devastating experiences. "I lost my wife, and I lost everything," I commented, as we walked slowly back to the parked car, until a woman appeared, saying, "She asked me to come for you." Words that initially seemed like just a practical arrangement turned out to be an invitation toward possibilities I never would have imagined. Sarah intertwined her fingers with mine as we walked in the golden light of the American sunset. Sometimes the most painful endings contain the seeds for the most authentic beginnings, if we have the courage to cultivate them properly. Her observation captured the essence of the fundamental lesson this extraordinary experience had provided, that truly devastating loss can paradoxically create the necessary space for the rediscovery of essential values and genuine connections. Previously obscured by the inertia of established circumstances, Emily always said that genuine life happens precisely in the spaces between carefully laid plans, I recalled, as we drove away from the cemetery, toward a shared future that continued to unfold day by day in unexpected moments that initially seem like problematic detours, but eventually reveal completely new paths toward previously invisible possibilities. As we drove toward the apartment we now officially shared, I understood with crystalline clarity the fundamental truth the experience had revealed, that even after seemingly insurmountable loss and deeply painful betrayal, authentic reconstruction remains possible when we find the courage to accept unexpected help and completely reimagine the meaning of a truly valuable legacy. Fate had taken a completely different shape from any scenario I would have contemplated a year ago, and yet it contained an authenticity and purpose that perfectly honored the essential values Emily and I had tried to cultivate during our shared life. The woman who had appeared unexpectedly with the message that would change everything had become my partner for a completely new chapter that neither of us had anticipated, but both now fully embraced, always aware of the significant foundations upon which our new shared structure continued to develop day by day. Thank you for joining me on this extraordinary journey that began with seemingly insurmountable loss and continued toward an unexpectedly significant reconstruction. If this story resonates with your own experience of loss, betrayal, or potential renewal, remember that authentic possibilities frequently emerge precisely where we least expect to find them, particularly after painful circumstances have created the space for genuine transformation, even if initially unrecognized.